Okay, so just one or two things to mention yesterday before we talk about why there's no reciprocal payment for Eidim Zomemim that sought to ensure a person was accused of theft and thus was going to be put in jail as an indentured servitude for not paying, but they were caught once the verdict was given by a second set of witnesses before that verdict was carried out. Um, Interestingly enough, just one question is that Lance asked a very good question yesterday about, what's this term hashata with the term imposition with the Hekesh and Gezerah Shaba that appeared both in the reference point to if there are two guys like fighting in a bar and one knocks into a woman accidentally and she miscarries, then we see that it's placed on the value of the victim, and we use the same logical thought that although there's an atonement component by according to Rav Papa, where even the Tanna Kamma and Rabbi Baroka agree that there has to be an assessment value based on either what the owner of the ox is worth because he's negligent for allowing his muad ox, who's got a habitual track record of damaging, and therefore in Shemaim they hold him responsible. So the kofar is financial sting to ensure that he has some culpability to as an atonement for his life, because he should really be losing his life for costing another Jew their life. And then the rabbi said it's not mutually exclusive, according to Rabbi Papa, where it can be an atonement component as well as working it on the cost of the victim. And why is it worked on the cost of the victim? Because the Tanna Kamma said that just like we learn the laws of Shabbos from the 39 Melachot on how to build the Mishkan, because those verses share a lot in common, so too with the word Hashata, with the word imposition, in both verses, it implies that it works on the value of the victim. And then Lance asked that question, well, like kind of how does it work? How do they assess the value of a baby? And we said there were two possible answers. I'm just reiterating this. The one is that you could say it's compensatory in nature, meaning if somebody came from higher level stock and they happened to get injured by two random people, then the value of that infant would be infinitely higher. No pun intended, Kevin. I know Kevin likes his pun, because that would be maybe a member of society that would inherit certain assets, especially if it was the son. We know that firstborns inherit double that of the rest of the children. We also know that it could be a case where the pregnant woman, if she was the barmaid compared to the local princess, the child would be valued at different fees. Those argue that it could be maybe a kanas, which is a fine. So we learn for the defamer that if a person says, listen, my wife wasn't really a virgin on the night, on the night of the marriage, etc., he has to pay a certain fee for bringing her reputation into ill repute, the same as a rapist. So if it's based on not mamum, which is compensation, but a kanas, a fine, and a fetus is set at a set fine, either way, if we take the simpler option and say all fetuses are paid the same for that miscarriage, then it's certainly a much lower fee, Lance, than what the perpetrator would have to have paid, valued on his own life. As the perpetrator, he should lose his life for costing another Jew their life, that potential life, and therefore his life is worth more, because if he's a man in his 40s and is earning well and looking after a family, he's substantially worth more than an infant that hasn't realized its potential. So if you're doing it based on the victim as an assessment, and it's got that word hashata, and it's the same with the coffee payment, that we do the assessment based on the compensation the family would receive. It doesn't mean there's no atonement aspect for the owner of the ox who's negligent and irresponsible in Shemai. So they're not mutually exclusive. Does everybody understand the nature of Lance's question? Lance, did I get it right?
I think so.
Okay, good. Well, you would know, Lance, because you asked it. So then we dealt with this issue, and I'm just going to have it in summary. And the fourth example that was used. So again, first example with the Cohen that wasn't given the reciprocal punishment. The second one was if Eidim Zomemim accused somebody of an inadvertent killing, they wouldn't be sent to the city of exile or refuge. They'd get the 40 lashes. The third case was this case of saying this person in the defense box, his ox, which was moored, killed another Jew and sought to have him lose his money. At which case, we say he gets the 40 lashes. This is particularly true if you want to say there's a kofir aspect, because they wouldn't pay an atonement, because the atonement for falsely testifying is a very different atonement to being negligible with allowing your ox to kill somebody. And if we say it's not voluntarily, according to Rav Papa, because there is a compensatory benefit, then we say the reason they don't get the reciprocal penalty is because it's talking about exclusively a case where they get lashes in their stead, because it's not they didn't have an ox that was negligent. They weren't negligent. They're just making false accusations. So therefore, the Gemara says, well, maybe they should pay the Hazama penalty rand for rand, or based on the fact that this is what they sought to cost their victim. But because there's a component in there of Kapora, it's not going to provide that component, and therefore their act of Kapora for false testimony would not match that, so they get lashed in its stead. The fourth example of the exception, as we learned, is a case that basically Zomemim witnesses aren't imposed the reciprocal punishment for allowing a Jew to be sold as a Hebrew servant for not paying a debt of theft, which they accused him of doing. So, for example, they said Reuven and Shimon were in the witness box and said that Levi stole money from Tzipporah, hadn't paid back the debt, and therefore the court assessed that he would go for indentured servitude, so that he's sold as a slave, and that money goes towards paying Tzipporah back, as well as his labor, which would make up the shortfall. We also said that if they were caught, once the verdict was given, that they couldn't have witnessed the so-called theft because they were in another place, and they're convicted of being Eidim Zomemim, plotting witnesses. They're not given the reciprocal punishment of being enslaved themselves by another Jew. So just a recap of that very quickly. Rav Hamnumna thought to say that this is only where the accused actually has the money to pay what he was falsely convicted of stealing. Because according to Rav Hamnuna, he's saying, since he wouldn't have been sold into slavery, because he's got the money, and a thief is only sold into slavery when he doesn't have the money to repay what he stole, then they are not sold, since they didn't conspire to have the defendant enslaved. So the first opinion of Rav Hanuna is saying, look, they clearly knew he was a person of means. They don't deserve to be imprisoned because they knew he had the money to pay off a debt. So then the question might be asked, well then, why don't they pay the debt? Why are they given lashes in return? We can get to that as a subject. It is covered by Tosfot, but the bottom line is just understand his mechanisms why they're not sold into slavery. Because they sought to just cost him money because they know he had the means to pay it back. Okay. But he's suggesting, Rav Huna, that where the accused does not have enough money to repay the alleged theft, in which case he would have been sold if their testimony had not been discredited. Then even if the witnesses have the money to pay the hazama penalty, they are sold, since this is what would have happened to the accused. Okay. So what Rav Hamnuna is basically saying is that the Bryce's conclusion is that Eidim Zomemim are not necessarily sold, and it's not a categorical answer, but it's limited to the circumstances. And we're saying if the accused would have had the money to pay the debt, in that case, they wouldn't have been imprisoned anyway because they weren't seeking to have him imprisoned. In a case where they don't, the accused doesn't have the money to pay the debt, in that particular case, they are sold since this is what they intended to do to the accused. That was the first position given in the Gemara. And Rava responded to Rav Hamnuna, and he basically said to them something very, very logical. He said, look, why should the witness be sold when the defendant has no money? Okay, I'm going to ask you guys, can you give me a logical explanation? I don't want to just give other information. I want you guys to think.
I never heard you 100%. Just repeat the question, then I can maybe give it a bash or somebody else. But just repeat it.
The reason I'm not just giving it over is because I actually want you guys to think. That's the whole point of Gemara. So again, Rav Hamnuna is saying, look, at the end of the day, they know this guy was a wealthy oak. And therefore, they weren't trying to have him in prison, so they don't deserve to be enslaved when they're caught out as being Eidim Zomemim. But when they know the defendant is impoverished and he will be sold as a slave, they should be sold as a slave. Okay? Now, Rava is saying that's not true. That's not true. Because why should they be enslaved when they know the defendant had no money and is going to be enslaved? Can you think of a reason why they shouldn't get the reciprocal penalty of indentured servitude? That's what.
But if they're not impoverished, then why should they? Because isn't that the law? Basically, if you're impoverished, then you have to become a slave because you can't afford the debt. So they can afford the debt. We presume, they can afford the debt. So just because they wanted to do it to somebody else, you can't apply that rule to them because it's not valid.
So that's an excellent answer. So that's exactly what Rava's answer is. He said to him, look, why should the witnesses be sold when the defendant has no money? They can say to the defendant, if you would have had the money, exactly as Gavin said, would you have been sold? Therefore, we can't be sold. In other words, the verdict against the thief is not that he must be sold, as Gavin quite rightly said, but rather that he must repay what he stole. It's only when he has no money to repay that the Torah decrees that he should be sold to obtain the funds to repay his debt. So basically, if you want to judge it on verdict, the same verdict should be applied to the witnesses. In other words, either to pay or be sold to make the payment. Since they have the money to pay, they can't be sold as slaves. So that is Rava's argument. So they're working on, just to give you guys a bottom line, there's only two different ways you can look at this argument. If it's based on intent, because up until now, we've learned, even in Sanhedrin, the general idea. Lance, you didn't come to Sanhedrin. I don't think Kevin or Arthur did either with Rav Simcha Steinhauer. Is that what you intend to do as Eidim Zomemim to the defendant should be done to you. So that's based on intention, right? And therefore, if you knew he had no money and you intended to have him enslaved because he couldn't pay the debt, you should yourself be enslaved. But that is not the interpretation of some of the opinions. According to Rava, the opinion is it's based on verdict. Whatever verdict you sought to have imposed on the defendant is imposed upon you. So if you had a verdict put against him that he was a thief, okay, then if he has the money, he pays the debt. If he doesn't, he's put into indentured servitude. And therefore, the only thing that can happen to you as a reciprocal punishment is that verdict is put to you. Now, you considered to be a thief legally, and therefore, if you don't have the money to pay, then you get indentured servitude. But if you do, then you pay the debt because you only accused them of theft. You never you never sought to have them locked up. And even if you did, that's not the basis of the verdict. The verdict had two applications, either indentured servitude or payment of a debt. But the bottom line is restitution of theft, compensation. That's what it's about. And therefore, you're compensating the victim with the money you sought to have him deprived of. That's according to Rava. So it's based on verdict according to Rava, and according to Rav Hamnuna, it's based on intent. Does everybody understand that so far? Guys, it's not rocket science. It's pretty straightforward. You understand? Can we go on? So the Gemara now has to rephrase Rav Hamnuna's question. So that say it very well. It says, rather Rav Hamnuna thought to say that this is so that the Zomemim witnesses are not sold as slaves only when either they have the money, okay? But when neither he nor the Eidim, whether the defendant nor they have the money, they are sold. So since in this case their testimony would have caused the defendant to be sold and they themselves cannot pay the hazama penalty, they sold. So now what the Gemara has done is it said, listen, it has to take into account this opinion of intent and verdict. And the only way you can basically merge the two is you have to say there's got to be a case where the defendant wouldn't have the money to pay back the debt, nor the Eidim Zomemim wouldn't have the money to pay back the debt. And in that case, they're given the reciprocal punishment of indentured servitude. Do you get how it's tweaked to serve both the verdict given and intent in this case? Because both match up. It would serve both opinions. Right. Now, there's only one problem, because Rava, who had this argument with Rav Hamnuna, said, look, and he gave a quote. He gave a quote in Shmot in Exodus chapter 22, verse 2, which is very strong. The merciful one said, if he does not have, he should be sold for his theft. Meaning, if you look at the pasuk, it's a very specific sort of instruction that he be sold for his theft, but not for the hazama penalty. So therefore, the brisa means to exclude Zomemim witnesses from being sold as slaves in all cases. Meaning, do you remember we learned about when somebody was exiled for inadvertent?
Yeah, outside. Okay, I'm coming now. Damon, sorry, I've got to go open up for Willie. Yeah.
All right.
Be back now.
All right, let me just pause this. So what we are saying is here, when we mention...
on there.
Oh, God. Gav, are you with us now?
Yeah, I don't have a choice, Damon. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Just before you ask a question, what I'm saying is Rav is saying to Rav Hamnuna that when you had this position, when you chose the verse in Exodus, and he, the person that had an inadvertent killing, shall be sent to the city of exile, it was an exclusionary term that only related to somebody that committed that sin. And so to here, only a person that commits theft is going to either have to pay the debt with finances or be sent for indentured servitude, but not the Eidim Zomemim. And therefore, not only do they not get indentured servitude, but they don't have to pay back the debt they actually get lashes. They actually get lashes because of the specific pasuk. We are going to learn cases where the defendant can countersue in certain cases for an amount should certain issues come back to light with monetary payments. So that Lance asked a good question, that can a Cohen be reinstated with his status after the facts come to light? You can't with execution, a little hard to put somebody's head back on their shoulders, but certainly with monetary compensation, a new court case can be given in response to the new evidence of Eidim Zomemim. It can also be a case where they say that in most cases not, because you can't apply the reciprocal penalty once the judgment has been passed, because then the defendant is ordered to pay the other party. But Rav Schottenstein did hint that there can be another court case at which, even in that one, even if there's not a reciprocal penalty, that in certain other cases you might be able to have a court case come to light. But generally on that court case, no, because they pay in the next world, and certainly with regards to corporal punishment, you're not going to get restitution in another court. So the bottom line of it is we're saying, because only the thief is sold for his theft, or he has to make payment, but not for the hazama penalty, the Eidim Zomemim can't be enslaved, and it would imply neither the debt paid, and therefore they get lashes. Arth, what's your question?
The question I wanted to ask about the unborn fetus, you said whether it's the first child. Does that apply to whether it's a male or female, which is more or less?
So firstly, I'd have to do an investigation in terms of if it's a set knas, which is a penalty that's paid for all fetuses, or is there an opinion that fetuses are seen as different values? For example, one of the values would be is inheritance, the firstborn gets double. The male would earn more than the female just simply because he's a breadwinner. In those days, women didn't have to work, and there's not potential income lost there. There's a difference between nobility compared to lower class citizens with compensation. Would it occur with a fetus as opposed to somebody already born? Or is a fetus judged at a set knas, a set fine to a person that caused her to miscarry? That would be need to be investigated. But we know if it's based on the victim and it's a set fine, whatever the cost would certainly be less than the person that damaged her, who's already a breadwinner and worth something, because it's not potential life, it's actual life that's manifested. Okay.
The other question is the firstborn, is that the double, is that to the male, or if it's a female, does it apply the same? It's just to the male. The
So
first male born.
it was only men that throughout even in the Victorian era, it was mainly only men that had inheritance, and women would try and seek out a good marriage proposal. But there was that case where the two daughters of Slavchad, I think it was, Helans, went to Moshe Rabbeinu and say, listen, they also...
5 daughters.
Sorry?
5 daughters.
5 daughters, not 2, but it was the daughters of Slavchad, eh? As far as I know. And they were given certain priorities. But I know in terms of inheritance, in terms of male and females, I do know, for example, that only a man can grant a divorce, not a woman. And there are certain advantages male have. However, that being said, that only men can grant a divorce, a woman can make your life hell to where you will give a divorce if she wants it. So, where people think that's patriarchal, she can make his life a living hell. Right. So I think I want Kevin to teach. Let's finish a bit early today. We can discuss tomorrow Rabbi Akiva's reasoning for another exemption, but it's going to take some time. So Kevin, do you want to teach us quickly?
Yeah. Excuse me, got a bit of a cold here. So in in the parshas, the series of parashiot that we're reading is about Yaakov and Esav and Yaakov's marriage, and he worked for Lavan. And then after he took the brochas, or got the brochas from Yitzchak, and Esav threatened to kill him, then he left, and they were going to have a reunion. And Yaakov was still wary. He thought Esav was still out to kill him, so he took the necessary precautions. Davened, he put the children at the back, the most vulnerable of the extended family at the back, and he sent gifts to Esav to appease him, and called him my master, and as a sign of respect. Now, who would call someone a master who you have no respect for, and someone who's out to get you? And but Esav actually was moved when they embraced, but Yaakov still wasn't convinced, and he didn't want Esav hanging around. And then they went their separate ways. And the bottom line is, what I was just thinking about this whole story, is that Yaakov had Hashem on his side, and he had emunah, and he still had fear. He still thought that Esav might want to take him out. So he prepared, and he wasn't complacent, even though at the end of the day, he didn't need to do that. So we need to prepare for things, whatever it is, and prepare in advance. That's doing hishtadlut, even though something may not happen based on who we are or what we've done in the past. You still have to be prepared, like lahavdil. You have to prepare for an important meeting, and even though you may get the deal, you may get a client, you still got to be you still got to be on top of your game, and not just expect things will just fall into your lap. You have to prepare. So Yaakov prepared, and that gave him peace of mind, and ultimately nothing happened to him or his family.
Good. Kevin, there are one or two things I want to share. Although that supplication in some opinions did move Esav to lessen his anger towards his brother, it said that his brother cried after he hugged him, but there was a reason. There's a midrash that said he tried to bite the jugular to kill his brother, of his brother. He
Yes.
hated him so much. And the reason he cried is it said Yaakov's neck turned to stone, and it damaged Esav's teeth, and he was crying in agony.
Gee whiz. Okay,
So-
that I never heard of before.
And it brought that because there was a commentary when Moshe Rabbeinu was going to be decapitated for that crime. The swordsman that tried to execute him, the blade bounced off Moshe's neck. It almost went to like stone and killed the executioner. And then obviously Moshe ran off to Midian. So there were a couple of cases where our necks were on the line, so to speak, and we were saved. But the point that you're trying to bring, Rav Simcha Steinhardt brought in one of his shirim, is that Yaakov, the question arose, if Yaakov was promised all these things, why was he so scared? And the reason being is that anybody that's spiritually aware could realize that they're not judged based on chesed, but mainly they could be based on din. And in din, nobody is perfect. And therefore, he wasn't sure if he still had the merit, or if it's something that would be a calamity maybe for his wife or children, and he might have some dependents that lived to fulfill the prophecy. But he still had different wives and children that could have been affected, and therefore he wasn't so sure that it would all turn out all right based on the fact that he judged himself with din scrupulously. And therefore the obvious strategies that one learns from this is supplication, is that many a road rage incident is calmed down by somebody saying, listen, I'm sorry, I accidentally turned, I didn't see you in my blind spot, you're right, and whatever. And whether it's true or not, the thing of it is it de-escalates. The other thing is, while you're saying this, to cock your 9mm so that if a guy gets clever and grabs you by the throat, you can empty your gat in his brain. It's always a deterrent. I'm saying, so you prepare for war, you have supplication, and the first thing you do in a road rage incident is you kind of get the kids and the wife safe. So he did all those strategies of preparing, and those are sort of his shtadlut, that it went into meticulous detail about you have to prepare as if there was no God, whilst knowing God is the only one that rescues you. It's that dual reality of understanding that we learn from an Epicurus and atheist, not to rely on God for miracles, but to work as though it's dependent upon us if charities get money and people are fed, and as if there's no God in the sense of our effort. And then it's up to us to solve the problems of the world. And yet, no, it's God completely that does all the redeeming and rescuing. That's a tough level. And that's what we have to learn from Yaakov.
Yeah.
Wow, both of you. Thank you.
All right, guys, have a good time. I'll see you tomorrow.
And sorry to add to that, Damon.
Yeah,
Sorry,
sure.
I thought what I wanted to say is that Rivka, it took Rivka a long time to have children, and she was doubting, and Leah had kids way before Rivka did. Rivka then eventually had Joseph and Binyamin, but the one she complained to Yaakov, and she was very upset, and he said to her in a bit of a condescending way that it's not I don't ground children, and he was rebuked for that, for being insensitive to even someone who's on such a high level, one of the avot. We're all human, and he was insensitive to her sensitivity, so to speak, and he shouldn't have said that to her. So where does it put us?
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's one of the
Yeah.
proofs that I had against somebody that was arguing for the New Testament. Is I said, you're and a Muslim person where they don't believe JC did any wrong, they don't believe Muhammad did anything wrong, or anybody did anything wrong. And I said, the proof that ours is authentic is that they show the real fallibilities and flaws of people that were at a very high level and yet also made mistakes. I said that's how you know that it's historical documentation of facts when the people we look up to have made mistakes, and we learn from their mistakes as well as their good characters. That's the essence of something that's true. If you say that they never made a mistake and they were always right, that's the first sign that you're peddling rubbish. Obviously, the conversation's never ended well. Okay, guys, have a good day.
It's not like Facebook. It's not like Facebook. Everything is a garden of roses.
Exactly. Exactly. There's a lot of thorns on those roses. Exactly. 100%.
Yeah.
Shot, guys.